December 21st, 1945. A phone rang in Dwight Eisenhower's office in Washington. On the other end was news he had both expected and dreaded. George S. Patton was dead. For 3 years, Eisenhower had walked a tightrope. Publicly, he disciplined Patton, restrained him, and apologized for him. Privately, he depended on him to win battles no other American general could. Eisenhower defended Patton to politicians, explained him to allies, and held him back when his aggression threatened to tear the Allied coalition apart. Now suddenly Patton was gone. And for the first time since the war began, Eisenhower didn't have to measure his words. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Behind closed doors, in letters, conversations, and later in his memoirs, Eisenhower finally said what he had never been able to admit during the war. Not to Roosevelt, not to Churchill, not to the public. Patton wasn't just a good general, he was indispensable. Eisenhower admitted that restraining Patton had been necessary for political reasons, not military ones, that some of his decisions to hold him back still haunted him, and that when everything was falling apart, when chaos ruled and time ran out, there was only one man he trusted to do the impossible. This isn't the story of Patton the legend, it's the story of the burden Eisenhower carried, managing a general so effective, so dangerous, that victory depended on both unleashing him and holding him back. And it begins long before either man held power, in 1919, when there were just two captains who believed the future of the war was speed. In 1919, Dwight Eisenhower and George Patton were nobodies. The war was over, the army was shrinking, and both men were captains assigned to a forgotten experiment called the Tank Corps at Camp Meade, Maryland. No glory, no prestige, just broken machines and an idea most of the army considered a fad. They spent long days tearing down engines, arguing over tactics, and imagining a kind of war that didn't yet exist. To Eisenhower and Patton, tanks weren't support weapons. They were the point of the attack. Fast, concentrated, relentless. Used to rupture enemy lines and collapse entire fronts before defenders could react. The army hated the idea. Traditionalists saw tanks as unreliable, expensive, and dangerous to cavalry and infantry doctrine. Officers who pushed mechanization were warned to stop or risk their careers. This is where Eisenhower and Patton began to diverge. Patton came from wealth and old military lineage. He could afford to be defiant. He wrote papers, challenged superiors, and pushed relentlessly for armored warfare. Eisenhower couldn't. He needed the paycheck. He learned when to argue and when to stay silent. But the bond remained. They shared the same vision of speed and shock, even as they learned different lessons about survival inside the system. 23 years later, those two captains would meet again in Europe, one as Supreme Allied Commander, the other as his most dangerous weapon. And this time, believing in the same future wouldn't be enough. By the summer of 1943, Eisenhower finally had proof that Patton was everything they had believed back in 1919. In Sicily, Patton's 7th Army didn't just fight, it raced. While British forces advanced methodically, Patton drove his army across the island with speed and aggression the Germans couldn't match. Town after town fell. Enemy units were shattered before they could regroup. To Eisenhower, this was mechanized warfare working exactly as intended. Then Patton ruined it. During visits to field hospitals, Patton encountered soldiers suffering from what was then called combat fatigue, what we now recognize as PTSD. Patton saw weakness where doctors saw trauma. In 2 separate incidents, he slapped soldiers, cursed them, and threatened punishment. The story leaked. Journalists reported it, politicians demanded action. Public outrage exploded back home. Suddenly, Eisenhower faced an impossible choice: fire his most effective battlefield commander, or defend him and risk the credibility of Allied leadership. Eisenhower chose neither. Instead, he issued a formal reprimand. He ordered Patton to apologize publicly to the soldiers, the medical staff, and his entire command. The punishment was visible enough to satisfy critics, but carefully limited to keep Patton in uniform. Why? Because Eisenhower was already planning the invasion of France, and in Sicily, Patton had proven something no one else had. He moved faster, struck harder, and disoriented the enemy in ways other commanders simply didn't. Eisenhower would never say it publicly, but privately he understood Patton's instincts, even if he rejected his methods. From that moment on, a pattern was set. Eisenhower would restrain Patton in public and protect him in private. By early 1944, Eisenhower faced a problem no amount of firepower could solve. The Allies needed to land in France, but only if the Germans believed the invasion would strike somewhere else. Normandy was vulnerable, Calais was obvious, and the Germans were convinced that if the Allies attacked, their most dangerous commander would lead it, George Patton. German intelligence tracked Patton obsessively. They studied his campaigns in North Africa and Sicily. To them, Patton meant speed, chaos, and disaster. Wherever he appeared, they expected the main blow to fall. Eisenhower decided to use that fear. Patton was placed in command of the 1st U.S. Army Group, a force that didn't exist. Inflatable tanks filled fields, fake radio traffic crackled across the airwaves. Patton gave speeches, inspected units, and posed for reconnaissance aircraft at carefully staged bases in southeastern England. The Germans bought it completely. Even after Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, German divisions remained pinned at Calais, waiting for Patton's real invasion to begin. Weeks passed. The deception held. Thousands of Allied lives were saved. But Patton hated every second of it. He wanted to fight, not perform. To him, standing idle while other generals earned glory was humiliation. Eisenhower couldn't explain the full truth, not yet, that Patton's reputation was more valuable than his presence on the battlefield. So Eisenhower did what he had learned to do best. He restrained Patton again, this time not to protect the alliance from Patton's behavior, but to protect the invasion itself. And once Normandy was secure, Eisenhower finally gave the order Patton had been waiting for. On August 1, 1944, George Patton finally got his army. The Third Army went operational in France, and almost immediately the war changed speed. Patton didn't push forward, he exploded outward. His armored columns sliced through German lines, liberated hundreds of towns, and shattered enemy formations before they could form coherent defenses. In a matter of weeks, the Third Army advanced farther than any comparable force in modern warfare. This was everything Eisenhower and Patton had imagined back in 1919. Speed replaced caution, shock replaced attrition. German commanders didn't retreat, they collapsed. Every day, Patton moved faster than Allied planners thought was possible. And that speed terrified Eisenhower. Patton was outrunning his supply lines, demanding fuel and ammunition at a pace the logistical system couldn't sustain. He called Eisenhower's headquarters constantly, insisting that if he were given priority, he could end the war in weeks. Eisenhower understood the temptation. Privately, he admitted that Patton might be right, that the Germans were reeling, that hesitation risked letting them recover. But Eisenhower wasn't just fighting Germany, he was managing an alliance. Montgomery demanded resources, Bradley needed coordination, political agreements with the Soviets dictated occupation zones. A single reckless dash to Berlin could fracture the coalition holding the war together. So Eisenhower slowed Patton down. Supplies were diverted elsewhere, advances were paused, coordination was enforced. To Patton, it felt like sabotage. To Eisenhower, it was command. And the tension between them, never resolved, was about to be tested under the worst conditions imaginable. December 16, 1944, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the Germans launched a massive surprise attack. Entire American units were caught off guard, front lines buckled, roads clogged with refugees and retreating troops. For the first time since D-Day, Allied victory felt uncertain. Eisenhower called an emergency conference at Verdun. His commanders arrived shaken. Bradley spoke cautiously. Montgomery urged consolidation and delay. Others argued for defensive positions while reinforcements were gathered. Then Eisenhower turned to Patton. "George," he asked, "how long will it take you to attack?" Patton's Third Army was facing south, engaged in offensive operations. To respond, he would have to disengage, pivot his entire force 90 degrees, and drive north through winter weather into the enemy's flank. For most commanders, it would take weeks. Patton pulled out a small notebook. He had already planned for this. December 22nd, he said. 3 divisions, 72 hours. The room went silent. Eisenhower didn't hesitate. Make it so. And Patton delivered. On December 22nd, exactly as promised, 3 divisions of the Third Army slammed into the German southern flank. The momentum of the German offensive stalled, then shattered. What had threatened to become a catastrophe turned into an Allied victory. In that moment, every risk Eisenhower had taken paid off. All the scandals, all the restraint, all the political damage. When the war was on the brink, Eisenhower had needed someone who could do the impossible, and Patton did. When the war ended, Patton became a liability almost overnight. His blunt remarks about former Nazis, his hostility toward the Soviets, his refusal to adjust to peacetime realities, everything that had made him effective in war now made him dangerous in peace. Eisenhower had no choice but to remove him from command. It was one of the hardest decisions Eisenhower ever made. Their final conversations were strained. Patton felt betrayed. Eisenhower felt trapped between loyalty and responsibility. Then in December 1945, Patton died from injuries sustained in a car accident. Only then did Eisenhower speak freely. In private letters, in conversations with staff, and later in his memoirs, Eisenhower admitted what he had never allowed himself to say during the war. Patton had been indispensable. His restraint of Patton had been driven by political necessity, not military judgment. Some of those decisions, Eisenhower confessed, still haunted him. Patton thrived where others froze, amid chaos, uncertainty, and collapsing fronts. Other generals planned, Patton willed outcomes into existence. That kind of leadership couldn't be taught or replaced. But Eisenhower also understood the cost. Left unchecked, Patton would have fractured alliances and created disasters no battlefield victory could undo. Managing him had been the hardest part of Eisenhower's command, and the most important. America didn't just lose a general in 1945. It lost someone uniquely built for war. Eisenhower had always known it. He just couldn't say it, until Patton was gone.